as promised, what we are going to do now is basically the exact same thing, just on a different platform. So there's some kind of new things that we will get to encounter on our new platform, which today is going to be Juniper. I think we will also get to play with Palo Alto, but when we do Palo Alto, we'll find that it is actually super similar to Juniper. There's actually not that many differences between them. So other than like the interface is slightly different, the buttons are located in different places, and actually on the Palo Alto there are way more buttons, but the basics of configuring a firewall rule and like the different concepts are pretty much the same. So what we have is, literally I took like my copy of the virtual machines, deleted the pfSense one out of it, and added an SRX. So SRX is Juniper's firewall platform. I have no idea like if SRX means something. Don't know, don't really care. And these should be completely blank. As you see the firewall's name, it has amnesia right now, because it doesn't have a host name set or anything like that. So, and that's not something like quirky I did as a little sad joke. That's just what it does when it doesn't have a host name set. So, unlike pfSense, with JunOS we can configure anything and everything from the command line. I run Juniper and Palo firewalls, like primarily is what there's both inside of the IA lab. So I would say, like, do I use the command line or the GUI to do stuff? It's a mix. Depends on what is going on, I guess. So for setting up interfaces and stuff like that, it's, I don't know, I guess in my opinion, easier to do from the command line interface. So that's where we're going to start. Plus, we have to set these up anyway because they're blank. We won't be able to access them. So everyone should have a VSRX currently up and running. The username to log in is root, and there is not a password. So a couple things when we first log in. We're down in the shell. Like if you do an ls, you will find that JunOS is running on top of like a kind of a BSD sort of operating system. So what's kind of neat about that is, unlike other firewall or other like networking vendors, when Juniper releases an operating system, it's the same operating system across most of their platforms. There's obviously tweaks that go on, because this operating system in this virtual machine does not have an ASIC to do firewalling. Unlike, my gosh, has anyone gotten just bombarded with spam calls lately? Yeah, I've gotten 4 of them this morning already. It's getting a little out of hand. So yeah, that's the cool thing about JunOS anyway, is that it is the same operating system. They just port certain features over to different operating systems. So assuming we're actually running hardware in here, Juniper will have made an ASIC for actually doing firewalling. What's an ASIC?
Chip specifically designed for a purpose.
Yeah, so instead of going to a multi-purpose chip like a CPU, we make an ASIC that's able to do just specific like firewall decisions. So that is where your network vendors get stuff that works pretty well and pretty fast and pretty efficient. And you have to do that. It's like crazy to think of the latency of going from a network port through the bus of the motherboard to a processor and back out another port, but that's actually causes a ton of latency. So they make ASICs to make the decisions on the fly. The neat thing about JunOS then is that this firewall has like the code in it to be a router. Or I guess if you're in routing and switching or advanced routing and switching, you probably will go and run OSPF and, well, probably that's about it from here. You can configure these firewalls as routers. Even though they might not have the ASIC, they can still do all that stuff in software. When you put the operating system on like a hardcore router, and where there's a routing ASIC, they just drop the software part of it. So that's kind of their way of doing things, and it's not like something specific to Juniper. Like Cisco does similar things, but Cisco has like 30 different operating systems they run. Or if you go to other vendors like Palo Alto, they just make firewalls, so they're not really worried about OS portability. So when we're down here, we're looking at just the BSD stuff. Rarely is there anything that you're ever going to really do here unless your OS is somehow hosed up. So does anyone know what we do next? Routing and switching recap. Not configure. CLI. CLI will take you to the review, we can show interface and see the interface status of interface 0, which will show as being up and all that good stuff right now. We can't do a lot of configuration here. Well, you can if you run the config command. So what we want to do next is go into configuration mode. So then you type configure. So just one extra hop to get there. So from inside of configuration mode, this is where all of the magic is going to happen. So JunOS's configuration is hierarchical. So it's kind of actually looks like an XML file if you would print it off. So there's like an interfaces section, and then everything is is tiered down in there. So you can navigate up and down inside of certain sections. Or you don't have to. You can just type the whole commands out and stuff like that. For us, what I'm going to have us do, all we'll do, I think, through command line is just set up the interfaces with IP addresses. And then we'll go over into GUI land. That way we don't leave anyone too far behind in the command line. So to go into just the interfaces section, basically like entering the interfaces folder, so to speak, of config. If we go in there and then type show, we can see the only thing that is currently configured is GE000, and it does not have an IP address on it. So that's where we'll start. So what do we do to set configuration lines inside of JunOS? Set, yeah. We'd go set GE, and then if you just hit tab, it will autocomplete. So GE-0/0/0. And do you know where we get these fun, like, why is there 3 sets of zeros in there? Other than just to make you type a bunch of zeros and slashes, which is really annoying. No?
One indicates like the switch number in the stack, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The last one would be the interface on the switch. I don't really know what the second number is.
The second number would come when we have, this is a Juniper specific thing where you have like a different hardware interfaces in there. So yeah, so most of the time the second one's going to be 0. But the first one is if we have like a chassis with multiple devices in it, or a stack. So we can take stacks of switches or stacks of routers and configure them all to act as one big one with a high-speed link in between them all. So if you were configuring, like Caden said, the third switch in the stack, third switch port 2, it would be GE3/0/2. In this case, it's a firewall and it's a virtual machine, so there's not stacks. But we can, if you had like multiple SRXs, you can configure them to act as one big one, which I probably wouldn't actually do. But you can get like if you go out shopping for Juniper firewalls and you have lots and lots of money, you can come in and get a security appliance. They're not firewalls anymore, they're security appliances. It's a very important thing to keep in mind. Oh my gosh. Like, here we go. I wonder if it'll show me a picture of it. Nope. Oh, that was the wrong one to pick. Well, there's some of these that take like slide-in modules. So maybe I need to go bigger for a 5600. Yeah, look at that one. You're doing a lot of firewalling if you have a firewall this big. But the idea behind this is these are all slide-in modules or slide-in blades. So if you have like we need some 10 gigabit interfaces, and we need some gigabit copper interfaces, and we need some fiber interfaces and other stuff. Depending on the kind of firewall, you can even get a DOCSIS modem that slides into the firewall. Probably not one that's this big, because you're probably not. What's a DOCSIS modem?
Converts the cable lines in most people's homes.
Yeah. So it takes our cable signal for cable internet. If you have a firewall this big, you're probably not getting cable internet, right? Maybe, but I doubt it. So this particular model doesn't probably, I guess I'd look, I assume does not have the DOCSIS thing. So that's what all the numbers are for. Anyway. So we're setting GE-0/0/0 unit 0. So what we're making is a logical interface on the physical interface. The reason for this is we can now go in and configure a specific protocol. So what protocol are we going to configure this interface to have? Lower level than that. OSI model protocol. So we want it to have, and I bet if we had a question mark, you get a list of things. Oh, I guess I need to go family yet. There we go. Here's our list of protocols. So we can do iNet, iNet 6, MPLS. That's about it. If this was a switch, we would have other protocols, and if this wasn't a virtual machine. So what protocol do we want? iNet, yeah. And then from there, it's just address. So set interface, unit 0 family, iNet address. And then in true fashion of me being here, I don't know the IP that should be configured on there for our admin machine. I'm betting it's 64.43.242.100. But for some reason, that's not popping out in there. So we'll look real quick. Yep, 64.43.242. Okay. So here, I'll try, now that I'm almost done, try to move that up a little bit higher so if you're in the back you can see it. It's not the bottom of the projector. So our address would be 64.43.242.1. And then now that we are outside of pfSense, it's not going to ask us for a subnet mask. We do slant 24 right after there. So that's going to set our subnet mask for us. So generally speaking, I would say there's probably maybe some areas where there's an exception, but when you're running JunOS and you are entering in an IP address, your IP address is always going to be the 4 octets of the IP and /subnet mask. Almost always. So when we're configuring a firewall rule for something, we would do like /32 to mean just one single IP address. Since we're configuring this interface to live on this subnet, it's /24 because it's a 24-bit subnet. So, there we go. Nothing exciting kicks back. So we can go ahead and do the other interfaces as well. So we could go set GE001, all the same stuff, unit 0, family, iNet, address. Like so. That one I do see on the screen, so that one's easy. 181. I wonder if I have do I have the zoom tool set up? I don't. So 24, 220, 181, 102. slant 24. So this is going to be our WAN interface. So we could also do like set GE001 description WAN interface inside of quotes. And then we have, what do we call that crazy stuff? Yeah? Documentation of stuff. That's what you never do on network equipment, right? So, and I suppose, like, realistically, if you have a firewall with 4 ports on it, it's probably not going to be end of the world. You're probably going to know which one's the WAN interface. We take, like, the core of the IA lab, which looks like, well, looks similar to that, but it's not running 40 gig blades. Looks more like this. Projector's lagging. There we go. It's very, very important to label a description on every one of the ports because there's like 400 of them or something. And I don't. I'll go over and look at a port and not have the slightest idea what it's connected to. Unless it's color-coded cabling, which some of them are. Or, well, most of them are color-coded, but I still can't tell you what it goes to unless I look at the descriptions. So we got interface 0 and 1. We go set GE002. Unit 0 family, INET. If you haven't noticed, like pretty much most firewall command line things, there's tab auto completion. And that will be 64.43 152.1 slant 24. And then maybe even a description. We hit our up arrow, go change that to a 2, and call that a DMZ. Any questions on what we have configured thus far? Nothing? Cool. So what is, when we are configuring, I would say generally speaking, basically anything other than a Cisco device, what's different when we're configuring command line stuff on a Cisco device?
You have to commit it.
Yeah, we have to commit this. On a Cisco device, as soon as we hit enter on every one of those lines, that configuration is live. So we would be, which isn't a big deal here. So, not that you need to move up to the top, but if we go commit, missing something. So I tried to commit and it failed. What does it want? Yeah, it's like, so, okay, friend, you're running root with a blank password. That's not gonna fly. It's actually gonna force us to set one. So, looking at the hierarchy it gives us, it's telling us there's an error in the system configuration. So the only thing we messed around in was the interfaces. So it's inside of system, and we're missing the mandatory statement root authentication. So what would our command be, aside from, I'll get you started with set? What would we do next? There we go, system root authentication. And then if we hit question mark, it'll tell us all of our options. So at this point, we could load a key file or do something like that. I'm just going to do plain text password. And when you hit enter, it should hash it and all that good stuff for us. But if you do that, hit enter, it's going to be like, oh, okay, give me a password. Which I'm going to do the ever so elite password 1 bang. So now if we go show system root authentication, we should have a hashed password in there. Now if we commit, we'll cross our fingers. Things should go well.
Any idea why I'd be getting an invalid interface type in system?
Yeah, if we were in edit interface, and then you did set system root blah. So to move back up to the very top of the hierarchy, just type top. That'll move you up. Or if you want to just bump up one level, which in this case would do the same thing because we're only one level deep, we would type up. So, and I think I'm committed now. Yeah. Did that do it for you?
Yep.
Cool. So the commit thing's really cool. I have been the guy working on a firewall from home, and I'm a pretty awesome person, but I've botched firewall rules pretty bad before. So when you botch them really good and you're working on it from home, guess what you then have the opportunity to do?
I get yelled at.
Well, yeah. You have the opportunity to get yelled at, potentially. So I got to get in at the time, my scooter, and drive over to the data center and get the serial cable out and be like, oh, I botched that one, and try to undo the config from the command line because I locked the WAN interface out or something like that. What the cool thing about doing commits on firewalls is we could do a commit check. Well, I set a timer on it. But what that would let us do is commit the configuration, and then if we don't confirm it within whatever time window we specify, so we could be like, commit the configuration, and if I don't, like from the console, say good to go within 5 minutes, roll it back. So that's handy when you're making firewall rules and you're not at the firewall, to be like, whoops, I just locked myself out, and then the firewall will restore itself to the previous configuration. If we... Oh no, what is it? Not request. I can't remember the command now. How to go back. It is rollback. Oh, maybe I need to be in edit. There we go. So a nifty thing that JunOS does is by default, it will keep the past 30 versions of your configuration. So as a pro tip, if you're going through playing with this firewall and you lock yourself out of it, and you're like, oh, I need it reset, rather than, I mean, you can email me and wait for me to go restore your VM or something. What I'm probably going to do, though, is come in and like log into your firewall and then just go rollback 0. So what this is I committed twice, or rollback one or the other. I committed this twice. There's 2 different versions of the configuration. So if you get stuck, remember that you can go back to all the different versions of your firewall's configuration and not be trapped and locked out of it. So, any other command line troubles?
Commit check, the one that just like checks for errors rather than.
Yes, I probably meant confirm. Is that what I did, was commit check?
Yeah.
There we go. Well, I guess I could just do the question mark. There we go. Commit confirmed. Automatically roll back if not confirmed. So, handy feature. Gets you out of a bind. So, now, from our handy-dandy admin machine, we should have access to the web interface. .242.1. There we go. Uh-oh. Oh, I missed the dot. That looks much better. Everyone get our fun web interface to come up? A fun little nugget, if anyone's ever bored. What's this do for us?
I don't think.
Yeah, so they like go scan the internet. So if we come up here and search Juniper web device, we find many, many, many devices that are, it's not doing it for me. Web device manager should do it. Let's try. What's that? I might have to do it in quotes, yeah. Yeah, it's not doing it for me. I'm just going to randomly click on it. So don't do this. Yeah, it's not coming up for me. Well, generally, when you log into Shodan and start searching for these, yeah, I'm coming up a bust, but I'm probably just being dumb about how I'm searching it. Or is it in title? Maybe that's what I'm thinking of as Google. Oh, yeah, here we go. Look, I was being all elite using Shodan. You can just Google it. You can just Google people's Juniper devices connected to the internet. That's not a, like, why are these connected to the internet? Or why am I able to do that? Yeah, they have misconfigured this device and are hosting the admin page out on the internet, which is something I would not do. Handy as it may be, would not recommend doing that. So, but for us, it's fine. Well, ours isn't on the internet anyway. So root, password 1 bang. And we'll give it a second. And it loaded most of the things inside of here. We're missing a little bit over there. So from inside of here, if you want to look at like what we were just doing, if you go over to CLI tools and go to CLI editor, you can actually see, if you scroll down to interfaces, when I was talking about that hierarchy, that's what we were doing right there. So nothing super crazy, like, hey, if you go to interfaces, you're going to see the ports, how they're configured and all that good stuff. So, or maybe you will if it's going to load for me. Yeah, here we go. So we see our interfaces. Everything's happy. So at this point, nothing really crazy, right? We just did interfaces through command line. But this is where pfSense is going to differ from most of the other firewalls that are out there nowadays, like the commercial ones. So in pfSense, we made our firewall rules based on what? Like, what was the first thing we had to pick when we made a firewall rule? I guess before we actually clicked plus, what tabs did we have to select? What were the tabs selecting?
Oh, the interface.
Yeah, we had to pick the interface that we were making the firewall rule on. So most firewalls nowadays are actually really hard to make a rule on an interface. What we do now are we make zones, because if we conceptualize like kind of where everyone is going with this, it used to be we would plug everyone into certain interfaces. Well, VLANs and all that stuff kind of came along, so the logic of doing an individual interface isn't really there anymore. So like DSU, for example, we have lots and lots of interfaces, but there's only like 3 actual physical interfaces plugged in. The rest are VLANs that are inside of them. So there's that logic. And then the other logic is we started subnetting people apart because it made sense to make smaller subnets and all that good stuff. But we didn't want to make individual rules for, like, in the case of DSU, we could say the East Hall wired subnet and the Kennedy wired subnet and the Heston Hall wired subnet. Like, all of those subnets probably have really similar rule sets applied to them, right? Maybe Heston Hall's different because that's where the counter of the beans live, doing accounting things. But when we look at East Hall versus the Kennedy Center, is there anything that we should really treat differently on our wired network versus the Kennedy Centers? Probably not. So instead of configuring each of those interfaces on the firewall with firewall rules, we can lump them together in a zone. So we'd make a zone called academic buildings or something like that. And then we would make firewall rules that apply to all of those subnets. That being said, for what we're going to do, we are actually, since we have a whopping 3 interfaces, we're going to end up with 3 security zones, and it's just going to be 1 interface per zone. But if we had lots and lots of server networks or lots and lots of like user access networks, we would lump them all together in similar security zones. The interesting thing is, by default, and I haven't quite figured this out as to why, but, and this is just play on words, the untrust zone is the default place that JunOS puts its admin interface. But you wouldn't think you would do that in the untrust zone, so what do you think would be in the untrust zone? Things you don't trust and don't want. Back to whatever IP address I just Googled. Admin interface is being hosted on. Whereas the trust zone is empty. So, yeah, there's that. The other quirky thing is from the web interface. There are some limitations, which is why, like I said, I do some stuff from command line and some stuff through the web interface. So, like, we can't rename this zone once it's created because there's references to it in other places in the config, and the web interface doesn't update those for us. So, the untrust zone is where we're going to have, like, this is where the admin machines live, or something like that. Even though it's called untrust, that's what we'll go with. On my actual firewalls I actually went through the effort of replacing that name because it was stupid with something better, but either way. So at this point we can add more zones, like if we make an external zone and put, this is the WAN interface, or the WAN zone, and then connect interface 1 to that zone, and we'll do one more for DMZ interfaces, and put interface 2 in there. There we go. So we've got our zones configured. This is also if you're playing around with Juniper stuff and you want to like allow ping or something like that. If you want to allow it to ping the interface, you actually do that from the zones and not the firewall config. So as in like right now I probably cannot ping this gateway interface, I don't think. If I try to ping 64.43.242.1. Yeah, no, it's not going to reply to ping. So it's not because there's a firewall rule missing, it's because the ping service is not turned on that interface. So this is kind of a logic thing. So if I add ping as a list of compatible services for that interface, it'll check our config, and then same thing as before, you go up and commit it, and it succeeded. Now let's try to ping. Yay! There's pings.
I haven't been able to get the web address, but I rebooted it.
No web interface, love.
Can't take it long.
I'll peek. All right. Whoops. Resuming along. So we've got this much done. The next thing, or I guess nugget of running JunOS is that the when we go to make a firewall rule, we can't make a firewall rule saying like allow this IP to talk to this IP. We can't do that. It actually, you know how in pfSense we made an alias at one time? So that's the only way you can do this with basically every other firewall vendor. pfSense is one that lets you just type in IP addresses and let it go. But inside of, I'm pretty sure pretty much every other firewall I've ever touched. So actually requires you to go and make an address book. That way it's not going to be a random IP address you're looking at. It would be like web server 1 that you would see inside of your firewall rule. So that's what we would do next. So if we go to security and policy elements and zone address book, we can actually start to make an address book of stuff. So we have 2 servers in the DMZ network, and we have to give it a name. So I would give it, I don't know, server 1, I suppose. And our address would be 64, 43, 142, 152, 100, and /32. So what was the /32 for again? It was the net mask, and why do we use 32 specifically? Less than 2. 1. Yeah. That would specify since all of the bits would be set. That means when the firewall is evaluating this address or this name in the address book, that mathematically it is just that one IP address. Technically, we could, like instead of doing, we could do an address range, so we could say 100 through 150 or something like that. Instead, you could do something weird like a /29 and do weird subnetting ranges like that. But generally speaking, when people are doing ranges of IP addresses, they don't actually fall inside of subnet math and would consequently break. So we got server 1 in there. Let's do another one and add DMZ 64.43.152.101. Whoops, that's the name. Server 2. There we go. All right, so we got a couple things in the address book. We could also do like, so it doesn't always make sense to do individual things. So if you go to address sets, we could make a set of like the web servers and put server 1 and server 2 in it. That way if we wanted to like allow the internet to access all the web servers, that's what's going on there. So we'll commit that. And yep, which in this case is just adding 2 things to the address book. Not a radical commit, but when we go make the firewall rules, we will have to commit then, yeah. So that is, like, from personal experience, I have spent a great deal of time troubleshooting why a firewall rule didn't work, only to log back into my firewall and notice I went actions and like just kind of missed commit and just clicked over here, thought the screen flashed and committed in front of it. You see the little progress bar goes pretty quick. Thought it committed and like, all right, why isn't this working now? And then start going all like ARPing stuff and doing all these terrible things, only to go back and see that I forgot to commit it. So when we go to start making our rules, that lives underneath security policy. So it has a little filter for us. Same kind of concept before when we were talking about making rules. So if we want to allow our admin machine here to access the web server, what is the from zone going to be? Untrust, yeah. Because remember the weird, like, for whatever reason it calls the default network untrust. And what is our to zone going to be? It'd be, because we're going to the DMZ things right now. So if you hit filter, we see there are 0 policies that currently exist. So right now, when I try to go to the web server, what's going to happen? Yeah, like, I did not anticipate that happening. I wonder if this is cached from me dinking around with it. Let's open up the second web server, because I know I didn't play with that one. Okay, yeah, it was cached. Look at Firefox is trying to be my friend. See, spinning wheel, it's not working. I did have a definite moment of like, what the heck there. So this is a Juniper thing now, and again with most firewalls, other than pfSense. What is the implied rule that exists here? Yeah, just to drop the traffic. The extra thing that comes up with, again, I keep saying like most commercial firewalls, meaning not pfSense, is if we're just rolling with no rule, it's not going to log anything. So nowhere will we find logs of me trying to get to that web interface. It's just dropping the traffic and going about its business. And conceptually that kind of makes sense, because if this is meant to be a firewall running lots and lots of traffic, if we didn't make a rule and we just wanted it ignored, I probably don't care about logging it. You know, like I can go into DSU's firewall, for example, and log like I don't know, we're getting hit by Telnet like 400 times a second or something like that. That's not really relevant information to me because we're not running Telnet on anything anyway. Maybe it's relevant, I don't know. So anyway, if inside of here we click add, we will get a whole big box of fun open up here. So what we are making, again with, like, it's not a firewall, it's a security appliance. This isn't a rule, it's a policy that we have going on now. So fun with words. But we have to give it a name, so it'd be like allow, untrust, DMZ, something like that. That's usually the syntax that I do. So then allow the untrusted network to access server 2 on the DMZ. So I'd probably actually do DMZ-server 2. And I swear every time I'm using the web interface, I forget to click this box. You have to give it an action, permit, deny, or reject are our lovely choices we get. So we're going to permit this traffic. Then we have to specify what direction are we going with stuff. So it'll be from untrust to DMZ. And you will notice the fun, like, look how smart it is. It populates these with the available options. So we didn't make anything in the untrust address book. So we'll just do any. And we're going to go to server 2. So we'll add server 2 in there. Everyone following all the crazy stuff got going on? So, okay. Then if we come down here, source identity. So when you guys all log into like the wireless and stuff like that, you are identified and your traffic actually is tagged with your username and stuff. So all the way out to DSU's firewall, we can like identify not just your IP address, but since the traffic is tagged with your username as well, we can actually see who is going on. So we could actually go so far as to say, like, it has to be this specific user logged into the network being allowed out. That's getting a little higher in our OSI model layers than just allowing ports and IPs. So we're not going to worry about that right now. But that's what source identity is going on right there. We can just leave that blank. And then the application is our fun way of saying port. You also, unlike pfSense, very few commercial firewalls will allow you to just enter in a port. You have to have a predefined application. So in our case, if you type HTTP, the Juniper ships with a bunch of pre-configured ones, and HTTP is one of them. You can tell the pre-configured ones because they all say JunOS in front of them. And we hit OK. And come up to Actions and hit Commit. And with any luck, uh-oh.
Did you see 102?
I don't know.
We made it for server 2, didn't we not?
We did. What is the IP address of server 2?
Isn't it 102?
Well, that's 101. I did 100 and 101. What did I make in my address book? So this comes back to, well, here's the perk of using an address book. Now, since we have the server at the wrong IP in the address book, I can just come into the address book and fix it. Ideally, you wouldn't fat finger the IP address in the first place, right?
That's asking too much of us.
Yeah, it is. It really is. I mean, if I can't even pull it off, right? So generally speaking, like when you're really configuring firewall stuff, copy and paste. Copy and paste IP addresses. Don't type them in. There, that looks much better. Now we have server 2 loaded. So, when we play around with this rule, come back to untrust, to DMZ, filter. We aren't doing any logging or anything of this rule. If you go over to logging and count, we can actually say, hey, count the number of times this rule is actually fired. We can also log them. That will be a bit more complicated for us to do. So we're not going to worry about reading the JunOS event log just yet, because that's, I wouldn't say like not for the faint of heart, but it just is a little more complicated than clicking a button in pfSense. So we do that, enable account, which I should have done before. If, again, for troubleshooting sake, when you're going along being like, hey, is my rule doing anything? If you enable the count, you'll notice you get a little hourglass. I'm trying to think what that's called. Showing up there. I'm going to come over here and do a gratuitous amount of refreshing of this page here. Hopefully that actually refreshed. If you go over to the Monitor tab, and you'll find that the Monitor tab sort of kind of mirrors everything you would have seen inside of the configure. So if you go down, look at the policy activities, and then switch your contacts to be untrust to DMZ, hit filter, we should find down here, it's counting all sorts of statistics for us. So if you're trying to get a rule to work and it's not working, turn on the count. Like from Sesame Street, right? Like, right here. So then you can actually see that your rule is doing stuff and not just sitting there like, you know, not doing stuff. Same goes for if you want to see if you have traffic just being blocked, or like, is my web traffic being blocked? Add a deny rule and add a counter to it. Then you can see what's going on. So, does anyone have any questions on stuff? I had sort of anticipated more explosions or something going horrifically wrong, but no luck on the blowing up. When we start doing NAT, we'll blow stuff up then, because that NAT is everyone's friend. But for now, while you're configuring stuff, just don't worry about this NAT button. Another one, just as a pro tip, when you are eventually working on homework and get stuck with something and Googling help and whatnot, this global policy button is what you don't use. And I actually am serious, don't use global policies. What those do is they circumvent zones and then are just raw IP to IP policies. And that will, there's a certain order, like logic of processing. And there's very complicated reasons as to why you would use a global policy. But generally speaking, you don't need to make them, especially for what we're doing in this class. Or even probably what you would do at work. You probably shouldn't ever really need global policies. It's just the lazy way of not doing interface or zone stuff. The other one that I want to make sure everyone is very well aware of is this exclude button. Don't use that. That's going to confuse your logic of what you're making in your policies. So don't try to make inverse policies, I guess is the concept. Generally speaking, if you're making inverse policies, it's kind of like making if statements that are super, super crazy with lots of extra conditions and stuff. There's probably a better way to do it than doing an inverse or an exclude like that. That bit of advice just comes from doing the Juniper firewalls in class a few different times. And that usually causes most folks more harm than good. So you end up just, yeah, it's not doing what you expect it to do. So, no other questions? Or nothing blowing up? So, we did just go and make a single rule. We will play around with a another little batch of this here coming soon. But I am resetting mine for the next class, which is a good old request system zeroize, and it will reboot it and whatnot. But so if you get stuck and want to just reset your firewall, if you do request system zeroize, like zeroize is apparently a word to Juniper, it zeroes out your system and reboots it. So, and it'll be back to being an amnesia firewall. So, with that, we will see everyone on Thursday.